Welcome to another episode of the Rhyme and Reason podcast, brought to you by the College of Arts and Humanities, which we call RHU at the University of Maryland. The Rhyme and Reason podcast is a series of riveting, provocative, fascinating discussions with some of our most compelling leaders in arts and humanities from the University of Maryland. Be sure to subscribe to the Rhyme and Reason podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. I'm your host for the podcast, Stephanie Shanakan. I'm the proud dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. Over the next few weeks, we're providing a series of race, equity, and justice conversations right here on the Rhyme and Reason podcast. We'll hear from folks across the RHU spectrum who are studying and thinking about these powerful ideas. It's a great honor to welcome to the RHU Terpcast Madeline Hsu, a professor in RHU's Department of History and the director of UMD's Center for Global Migration Studies. Thanks so much for being here, Madeline.
I am so happy to be here with you.
Awesome. I've been looking forward to this conversation. But before we jump into it, let me tell our audience a little bit more about you. Madeline Hsu joined Maryland's faculty this year, coming to Maryland from a distinguished career in the history department at the University of Texas, Austin. The award-winning author of 3 books, Dr. Hsu is a renowned historian of African American history and patterns and cultural practices of Asian migration to the United States. Her second book, published by Princeton University Press in 2015, is entitled The Good Immigrants: How the Yellow Peril Became the Model Minority. It won the 2016 Robert H. Farrell Book Prize from the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations. Congratulations on that, Madeline.
Well, thank you.
So let's get into it. I'm so glad that we were able to recruit you here from the University of Texas, and we were excited to welcome you to the History Department in the fall of 2023. Can you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the University of Maryland and to the position that you're in right now? And tell us a little bit about how the transition has been for you.
The transition has been really quite wonderful. The University of Maryland campus has such amazing faculty and students. I also particularly appreciate when I was being oriented to campus, learning more about the strategic plan, Fearlessly Forward, which really showcases pillars of core values such as campus to community outreach, diversity, equity, and inclusion, projects, and then also encouraging faculty to think about human society's grand challenges. And all of this has been very exciting to me. As we've been discussing, my research is really focused on migration studies. So my trajectory has been to go from Chinese American migration, Asian American migrations, U.S. immigration, and the most recent publication process has been the Cambridge History of Global Migration. So I am broadening my scope, and it was thrilling to me that the University of Maryland campus has already a Center for Global Migration Studies, which was co-founded by the legendary historian Ira Berlin and also my colleague Julie Green. And I think it really shows a vision and an understanding that we need to understand migration as a human activity, a human aspiration, something that we see throughout history and that really is found among many cultures and societies around the world, and to use this as a lens for understanding just who we are as peoples across many kinds of perceived differences, and also, unfortunately, institutionalized differences as something that makes us all human. Mm-hmm. So this is, I regard this as a great opportunity for me to be here.
Yes. And I think what we were so excited about, Madeline, was that you were coming as a professor, but also as the director of this legendary center, which really, the center signals a sustained interest in this kind of research. Now, coming into the position, can you tell us a little bit more about what the center is up to right now? What's your vision for the center? You know, I've been here only 2 years as well. So when we come into these roles, we come in with our own sense of vision, our own sense of what's important and our priorities. So if you could help us understand where the center is right now, what do you see as the contribution of the center to our understandings of the human experience?
So if you're a migration studies scholar, you're very preoccupied with trying to emphasize the humanity of people who migrate, even though, unfortunately, migrants in different places, with different legal statuses, but then also racialized in many different ways, are perceived and treated very differently. So we have migration studies scholars who most often will focus on specific ethnic communities, sometimes specific historical junctures. But to understand the big picture, one of migration as a human activity, but then also the extremely powerful institutions and beliefs that regulate migrants with very different kinds of outcomes and access to rights and protections, you really have to have this broader lens to understand how both of these aspects of human societies are very naturalized and taken for granted. And so a center such as CGMS here on University of Maryland's campus allows us to bring together the collectives, the networks of scholars, but then also place into relationship their scholarship and their efforts to understand the experiences of many different ethnic and migrant communities. And it's when we have this big picture, I think, that we are able to see more clearly really to humanize all migrants and really to understand the many differences in their situations and conditions which can obscure our perception of them as human beings. But if we put them all into the same framework, we begin to understand the very powerful ways where even the language of who gets described as a migrant and what kind of migrant obscures the ways in which migration is an aspect of so many human operations. And we can see all of this through this broader framework.
So powerful, the depth and the width of this kind of work. And I know that since you arrived, you've been building coalitions across the college and across the campus, because there's so many faculty members and scholars who do work in this area. Could you talk a little bit about how you've been going about building your community of scholars?
So one of the challenges when you have such a big framework is that you actually need to be able to focus on specific programs and specific kinds of visions. And so one of the ideas that I've had since before coming to Maryland is to develop what I'm calling the Global Maryland platform. And part of the goal is to showcase and be able to bring together kind of on the same page all of the really invigorating and exciting scholarship by faculty, students, and also by staff that is ongoing at University of Maryland that explores the experiences of different ethnic and migrant communities in many interdisciplinary ways. Also to encourage and foster research by students that brings them outside of campus to do research among the very diverse communities that we find in Maryland and the DMV area. So, for example, the Center for Global Migration Studies has already been developing the Archive of Immigrant Voices, which showcases oral histories of immigrants that students have conducted, and this is a growing public-facing archive. We have also received grant funding from RHU, thank you, Dean Stephanie, and also the Teaching and Learning Innovation Center to try to pioneer a course that we're calling Maryland's Ethnic Foodways, I am fortunate to be able to work with the James Beard Award-winning scholar Psyche Williams-Forson in developing this class, which will train students in migration and food studies and then set them on a path to conducting ethnographic research on Maryland's ethnic food businesses. Maryland has an incredibly diverse and heterogeneous population built over centuries, really, of immigration. And so this Maryland's Ethnic Foodways is really intended to help students be able to understand Maryland's diversity, but then also for us to record and develop records of this diversity and place them on these public-facing archival platforms. One of our objectives is to acknowledge the very unequal ways in which different communities, different peoples, and their experiences and perspectives are available in the digital universe. And so we are hoping to address some of these gaps in representation and to enrich people's understanding of Maryland as a place that really has become home to, can accommodate peoples from many different places.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's so exciting. I remember when we launched our Harmony Fellowships, and this is a new initiative from the College of Arts and Humanities, and so we were so excited that you and Psyche came together for in our inaugural rollout of the Harmony Fellowships. And I remember reading your proposal to come together to think about food and migration, because as an ethnomusicologist, I also think that different threads of folklore are a great way of tracking how people have lived, how they've moved, their histories. I think that music is definitely one of those things that allows us to think about culture in this really complicated way, but food also, right? And so congratulations on being one part of a pair of Harmony Fellows. The other part of what you just said really made me chuckle, because over the weekend I cooked curry, which is my mother's. So my mother was from Trinidad, and Trinidad has that very interesting history of having brought the enslaved first, and then when slavery was outlawed, they brought Indians as indentured workers. So now, if you go to Trinidad, it's half black, half Indian, and so curry is then part of the food identity of Trinidad. So as you were talking about how people move, how this is so connected to hundreds of years, right, from slavery to indentured workers that were brought in from Asia. We see how it manifests still in the 21st century.
And food can tell us particular ingredients. So, for example, the chili pepper, which is so intrinsic to so many cuisines around the world, originates in the Americas. And then it is brought around the world by Portuguese, by different imperialist invaders and then colonizers. We all embrace, well, not everybody, but we all enjoy our spicy food, most of us. But it also is a reminder of these long histories.
And we can talk about chocolate and coffee and sugar. I mean, all of that, all of the foods that we know and love, and the drinks are connected to this deep history of people moving and land being taken, right?
And sugar was a major crop. So sugar can only be cultivated in certain subtropical areas. It's also a product for which humans seem to have an intrinsic liking for. If you've had a baby, you know that one of the first things they enjoy eating are sweet items. And so sugar cultivation has been a major crop. It is grown in different plantation settings, sugarcane, and requiring a labor force working under dire conditions. The plantation owners very often wanted to have significant levels of control. We see this very clearly in places like Hawaii, also in the Caribbean, and for this they imported enslaved workers and then also indentured workers from Asia. And so hand in hand, it can reveal to us these histories of exploitation, of colonization, but also how market forces work. So it's food is, I think, is something that brings us together, and but it's also such a powerful capitalist enterprise.
Absolutely, which I think speaks to why the Center for Global Migration Studies can pull in faculty and scholars from across this campus, economists, geographers, historians, of course, and, of course, ethnomusicologists as well, right? Absolutely. What are you most excited about? I remember you showed me a map that CGMS has produced, which kind of tracks where folks have been and where folks are from. Can you talk about what you're most excited about for this particular next phase of the Center for Global Migration Studies?
So the proximity to Washington, D.C. is very exciting.
That's right.
Maryland is presently, but has been for a long time, a global place. The Port of Baltimore was a major center for all kinds of shipping, all kinds of trade. Maryland has received migrants, many refugees, just from all parts of the world. And so this is a really vibrant, actively shifting, and I think very attentive to these processes of ongoing change and inclusion. So I find Maryland to be a really wonderful place to try to underscore and then also to explore how these dynamics are happening. With the many wonderful faculty and students I have found on campus. I've also been doing outreach to local historical societies, the different archives, and this is just such a really welcoming and also a congenial space in which to try to develop these collaborative efforts. And so to me, I think the most exciting thing is actually the opportunity to try to build these networks and coalitions, because I think what the Center for Global Migration Studies can really accomplish is actually coalitional.
It makes so much sense that Ira Berlin founded this. It makes so much sense because the connection to the deep history of slavery to where we are now is so important. We've talked a bit about the fear that society has of migrants. What I really value about this center is that there'll be a lot of focus on the experience of migrants, what they go through, what their challenges are, and how those challenges have changed over time. So can you talk a little bit more about the local challenges that migrants have in the United States?
So I think at a basic level, migrants are deeply aspirational. There are some people who have been forced to migrate because of deteriorating conditions in their homelands, environmental.
Which were also results of capitalism from the West.
So if you look at overall patterns of refugee migrations, you can see that the areas, the parts of the world that produce the most migrants are those that have been colonized, and then when decolonized, have been left in deep disarray.
Absolutely.
Economically, politically unstable, subject to violence. Some of the problems, for example, that we are currently experiencing in the Middle East, I think are in part a problem of that people need a place to be. People need a place to be where they can pursue sort of a reasonable standard of living in reasonable safety. And the aftermath of decolonization is that many people were left without such places in which they could make their lives. But, migration is also I see it as this deeply human kind of activity. And the Center for Global Migration Studies can try to promote attention to the ways in which migrant activities, but also descendants of migrants, show up in our everyday lives. And some of this can be sort of in the great range of foodways we have available to us, the different kinds of ethnic food restaurants, but also to try to, I think, encourage acceptance and some level of comfort that this is something that humans have been doing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it has not undermined our societies, that we in fact have significant reasons for coming together and just accepting each other. Mm-hmm. Without, has also been, unfortunately, many ways of stigmatizing, mm-hmm. of dehumanizing migrants, and one of our goals is to try to help people see past this and to understand that people are people.
And people move when they're in search of freedom and the pursuit of happiness. And this is something that, quote unquote, founding fathers,
yes.
Who were also migrants, right? So, but we don't call them that.
No. And people are not trying to invade. People are not trying to take over. They're simply trying to find a better path forward.
That's right. And of course, it makes so much sense that our second podcast of our series is with you. The first was with Dr. Shelby Meisner, who studies indigenous experiences and indigenous histories. And she and I talked so much about the importance of thinking about land and power and so on. And I think that's definitely part of the same story that we're telling here with the Center for Global Migration Studies. All right, as we wrap up, Madeline, what are you personally working on now? I know so much of your time is spent building the center and taking it into its next chapter. But what are you? Do you have time for your own research? Are you working on a book right now? What's new?
So, an article I'm working on now concerns Asian students. And so if we look at Asian students, it helps us to understand exceptions to the largely racial focus of many immigration regulations. Because, for example, even as the United States was setting up its earliest barriers to immigration, targeting Asians, exceptions were built in for Asian students. And there is a way in which education and access to education is transformative of the individuals, but in many ways it helps us to kind of transcend our racial categories, right? And so excluded Asians, in fact, by going through education, then convert themselves into highly employable persons who will find it easier to be allowed to immigrate and settle in the United States. And so it brings together two, I think, key areas of inequality, but also opportunity. Who gets to migrate, right? But then who also gets to access education.
That's interesting.
Yeah, as in helping us to think through how does this differential access then help us to think about different kinds of racial inequality.
Well, thank you so much for coming on our little
It's such a pleasure.
podcast. It's a pleasure to talk to you as always. I'm excited to be partnering with you as you do this work, as somebody who also came here from a different country. This work resonates with me so much, and its connection to U.S. history is also something that resonates with with so many of our colleagues on this campus. So thank you very much, Madeline, for joining me. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of some of the important questions concerning race, equity, and justice. Please join us for other podcasts in this series, and be sure to visit www.rhu.umd.edu to learn more about the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland and our efforts to see a more equitable and just future for all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Madeline.
Thank you.
Take care.